Hello folks and welcome to the show here in our game with myself, Shane Stapleton, joined this week by Nickey, Brennan. We're going to have Bernard Flynn, former Meath footballer, on, and Phil Lanigan of the Daily Mail a little bit later on, so we've loads on the show as well. And for people who might have missed the other day, Michael Verney has had a child, a young daughter, so if you want to message him on Twitter and congratulate him, he's over the moon. He's getting very little sleep. And hopefully, actually, Nickey, that lack of sleep means that he didn't see what happened over the weekend to Offaly against Tipperary.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, look, in a way, Shane, I think this was something that was going to happen. I think it was going to be very hard for the defeated McDonagh finalists to come in and rise their game again. I think we'll probably go into the game in a moment, but I think from an Offaly perspective, one of the most disappointing things about it was that 2 weeks previously, Offaly brought a huge crowd to Thurles for the under-20 All-Ireland final. And yeah, and on last Saturday, I was listening to it as I was heading to the game in Carlow, and there was Tipperary outnumbered the Offaly support 5 or 6 to 1. Now that must be very disheartening for the players, but it's difficult enough to know how the players would, really would motivate themselves to something like that. I think what we've seen really over the weekend, while the game in Carlow was competitive, and we'll talk about that in a moment, I think really we have seen the last time you'll see teams from the Joe McDonagh entering the championship quarterfinal preliminary rounds. I don't think it's going to happen again, and I think that's the end of it. I think it's the right thing to do as well. If you take Carlow, they had the celebrations with the McDonagh Cup, and Tom Mullally alluded to that afterwards in his interview. Maybe they overdid the celebrations. I don't blame him one bit for that, but it's very hard to motivate yourself for another competition where realistically, you're not going to win it. I don't care what anyone says. So, but I think that's the end of it now, and I think we've seen some horrendous results in the preliminary quarterfinals over the years, and I think that's that. And it's not being disrespectful. It just means that the McDonagh finishes with the final, and you win it or you lose it, and whatever. But it also means that it creates maybe an extra 2 weeks space, and that's probably really more important in the calendar where things could be pushed out a little bit. Now, I'd be hoping they might even push them a little bit into August, maybe, but that's another argument for another day. But at least if you got rid of the preliminary quarterfinals, it would give a little bit more space to the competition and give teams a chance to catch their breath.
Yeah, and I think it'd be a good idea to go another week or two into August. Like, there's so many clubs that are going to lose out because players are going to head away on J1s for the summer, and then they're scrambling for players. But another thing, Nickey, I want to ask you is, because of your knowledge of GA administration, having been Leinster chairman, GA president, would you think it's one of those things that it can be turned around quick enough to have that rule removed, to remove the Joe McDonagh finalists from the competition as soon as the 2024 championship?
Yeah, I do. So there's currently a series of engagements taking place around the country with Derry Kent's CCC, talking to counties about various aspects of games, not just hurling, by the way, but football as well. So I honestly think that'll happen, and there will be changes. And I think this is one of a number of changes that will take place. I also thought that there was some momentum built up for under 19 maybe to come in instead of 17 would be development, but instead of 20. And the thinking being there that you would confine that solely to players. You couldn't play inter-county senior if you played under 19, but equally it would start putting back the opportunity to play under 19 on the same bill as a senior inter-county game, because we're seeing senior inter-county games now as standalone fixtures, and we've all become accustomed in the GA to double headers. But it would. I understand now that the under 19 concept is completely dead in the water, and it's not going to happen, and that's it. So we're going to see under 17 continuing in the manner it is. I'm a little bit disappointed about that, because I think that's under 17 playing in such intensity. If you take the final in Thurles there recently with the under 20 and under 17 together, I just feel that under 17 with 16-year-olds playing, it's putting them under enormous pressure. And I feel they should be allowed more a developmental role in that grade. But look, there's no point in talking about it. I think that's the way it's going to be now, so we just have to get on with it. I know there would be those who would still prefer to see under 18, minor back at under 18. But that argument was very well defeated at Congress earlier this year, which I actually thought, I was a bit surprised, to be honest about it.
Galway, Tip and Dublin, Clare, so we'll be previewing them big time later in the week. But just to talk about Tipperary beating Offaly by 738 to 318. A couple of weeks ago, before we knew that they were going to end up meeting, but myself and Verney were plotting sort of a path where it could happen, I said I was just messing, and I said, look, would you take a 15-point loss now if I handed it to you? And, he wasn't answering me. And then I said it to him again 2 weeks ago when we knew it was going to happen, and he wouldn't. I could never have believed that would end up a 32-point loss. It was just a crushing defeat.
Yeah, it's absolutely demoralising. I think Johnny Kelly had been making decent inroads there. Now, I know he'll be hugely disappointed not being in the, having lost the Joe McDonagh, but that is going to be very, very difficult for everybody in Offaly hurling to stomach, to be honest about it. I mean, it's the highest scoring game in the hurling championship ever. It topped the 80-point mark. And we also had a bit of history, and it's only right we should acknowledge this, that Jamie Callan hit the 40 goal mark. He's the first player ever to hit 40 goal marks, all from playing the championship. Now, that is a serious record, and a fair credit to his prowess as one of the great forwards of modern day hurling. There's no question about that. But it's but for Offaly, I mean, the game was over at such a short period. As I said, I was heading to Carlow. It started at 4. The one in Carlow was at 5, and I was listening to it on the radio. And look, the game was over after 10 or 11 minutes. Once Tip bagged their first goal, it was a matter of how much it would be. But the final score at the end was just demoralising. You have a situation with Tipperary, to be fair. I've no criticism whatsoever of Liam Cal and his players here. You do what you have to do. So there's positions up for grabs on that Tipperary team, and you want to be putting yourself in a position, if not a starting position, then make sure you're part of the first 21 anyway. So it was just an outstanding performance by Tipperary, ruthless in the extreme. But this stage of the championship, that's just the way life is, and it's just Offaly coming in on the back of losing the Joe McDonagh. No doubt about it. It must have been very difficult for Johnny Kelly to lift that team and try and get them back into championship mode. And I just felt it was always going to be a step too far. But at the end of the day, the margin was the hugely disappointing thing from an Offaly point of view. But look, Tip will be happy. Players get confidence from bagging goals and points and that. But it'll be a very different game against Galway at the weekend.
Yeah, a very costly one for Burr too, because Owen Cahill, who'd scored 1-7, was playing brilliantly. He seemed to do a bad hamstring injury, so maybe he'll be in bother now for the county championship. Charlie Mitchell, I was delighted for him because obviously the under-20 final didn't work out great as captain of Offaly that day, and he was taken off early in the second half. He got 1-1 for himself. He was decent. And Jason Sampson looks a player, especially when he moved up the field, who looks totally at home at Liam McCarthy level.
Well, look, yeah, the important thing for Offaly now, I was delighted for Mitchell as well, and that often happens actually, because you'll often find when you have a senior player like that plays 20s, it just might not work. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's rather maybe the same thing as Charlie Mitchell. For myself in '74. Now I was a sub on the Kilkenny team, but actually came on and played in the Leinster final, and I actually played in the All Ireland semi final. And I was actually taken off in the All-Ireland under-21 final against Waterford. But rather ironically, and I never saw this happen since, I was brought back on again in the last 10 minutes. Now, I don't know what that said, what the rest of the subs must have thought. But look, these things happen. Sometimes just because you're a senior player, there's an expectation that you're going to just run the show and it's under-20, under-21. It doesn't happen. But look, he's a good lad. He got a goal and a point, and hopefully there are better days. Look, the one thing about Offaly will have top hurling in the National League. They won't be in the McCarthy Cup Leinster Championship next year, but they will have top hurling in the National League. So Johnny Kelly hopefully will use that to maybe improve the team further and make them competitive, and not feel that he has to go to that under-20 team too early, because there's still a lot of young lads on that, and he just needs to give them time to develop, to be honest about it.
Yeah, because they were even young for under-20 if the final proved anything. Another thing I wanted to mention then was, you were the original Peter Canavan then, like he came off and back on. So you were the original Canavan.
I wouldn't compare myself to that to Peter under any manner of means. It was just an incident that happened in a game. I don't know the background to it, but look, we won the All Ireland that year, and it was the first time we ever won the under-21 All Ireland in '74. But memories, Shane, memories.
And do you think Seamus Callan, like as you said there, 40 championship goals all from play? There's nobody in the modern game who comes anywhere close to that, especially from open play. Nobody is near. But, you've the likes of Nickey Racker, who has 59 goals, and, there's a couple of others, Tony Doran, I think he has over 40 as well. Well, give or take around that as well. Do you think Seamus Callan gets the credit that's, warranted here? Because people talk about TJ, Patrick Horgan, Joe Canning, but it feels like they don't talk about Callan in the same breath. When 40 championship goals from play in Munster, let's call a spade. They're tougher teams. That's unbelievable.
I know, it's an incredible record. I think the difference probably from the Nickey Racker, Christy Ring, that era, is that there's a lot more games now. And I think that's probably a factor in helping the modern day hurlers to build up their scoring records and all of that. but it's an incredible record, and I think he's been a huge servant of Tipperary. And it's interesting that Liam Cahill, had him back at the edge of the square against Offaly. Now, I saw one of the goals he got was really down to some really poor defensive play, to be honest about it. But you have to give credit to Callanan. And look, it's often said that sometimes players maybe don't get the credit they deserve. But look, such is life. I mean, you have to, he just delivers every day and most days for Tipperary. And he probably would have added one more to that tally, and I'm just being a bit parochial here now, Shane. But for the lovely hoop that JJ Delaney did one time, I thought I might throw that one in just to add a little bit of spice.
Well, he scored 2-6 from play in those 2 games against JJ as well, I might remind you. So he didn't do too badly in those.
No, but I had to throw in the old hook because it was one of the great occasions in hurling in terms of a skill of a game that maybe we don't see as much of, but that was one of the great defensive skills that was there.
Okay, delighted to say we're joined now by Phil Lanigan of the Mail. How are you, Phil? You well?
All good. How are you, Shane? How are you, Nickey?
Hello, Philip.
Well, look, we're talking here about Tipperary getting that victory against Offaly, and I think Tipperary had something like 13 different scorers from play. Craig Morgan was back, had to go off with a hamstring cramp, so apparently that doesn't rule him out for the Galway game. Gerard O'Connor came back from injury. Jason Ford came back. All of a sudden it feels like and I think Cathal Barrett's going to be back the next day as well. All of a sudden it feels, Phil, like this Tipperary team is starting to come to the boil nicely at the right time.
Oh, look, Jason Ford's return was huge, wasn't it? He looked so sharp, and you just wonder, like, Tip have been so good this year. Liam Cahill must be wondering, how did they end up in this position where they have Galway and Limerick to come when they should have been in the Munster final? Like that match against Waterford, it was the only real blip for this team. They've been at such a level, and they looked on it again. And the Waterford display was such an outlier that it's changed the whole course of the championship in every which way. So I know Liam Cahill and Tip are kind of let's move on, but like the really when Clare would have been thinking they would have fancied themselves chances against Tip. Tip would have fancied the Munster final. So it's going to be a very hard route to an All-Ireland, but they look like a team capable, again, of winning it.
Yeah, and then, like, Nickey, from your point of view, it just feels like there's a bit of a maturing going on of some of the other players that Tipperary have. Mark Keogh being the obvious one. Now, I would have felt he should have had far more game time in the previous seasons anyway. But 3-3, and he just looks now like a killing machine.
Yeah, but I think Tip just need to just chill a little bit now after Saturday. Offaly were always coming into the match on the back of losing to Joe McDonagh. There was low morale in the camp. Johnny Kelly is a great guy who I know well, and he will have done the best to rise those guys. But Liam Cahill had to make a statement after the way they played against Waterford, as Philip has just said. They really blew a Munster Championship final that they should have actually got into, and it let them down big time now. Let's be through it. So players had to start atoning for that, and it was a ruthless performance, which you would expect from a team of Tipperary's calibre in the circumstances. And Offaly were always, in my view, going to be lambs to the slaughter last Saturday. So I think in terms of the amount of scoring returns where we saw Jason Ford with 2-11, Mark Keogh with 3-3, Morris with 7 points, that type of scoring, you won't see that type of scoring against Galway. I'm not saying Tip won't beat Galway, but it's going to be he'll have different markers on him. It'll be far tighter. You won't have as much space. You won't be able to get the freedom to drive the ball through the lines that you had last Saturday. So it'll be a very different game. So any comparison is just not worth talking about. It's a very different game, and Liam Cahill knows that as well.
And Phil, from your point of view, do you think this game there was much to be had for Tipperary in terms of, like, I'd see it as a bit of a tune-up fight, go out, get a bit of confidence, get lads scoring, blow off the dirty cobwebs from that Waterford game, and then, like, to be honest, to me now, assuming you come through with no injuries and Morgan's okay, it was the perfect game a week ahead of championship clash with Galway.
I would have thought so again. I think part of the reason why Tip kind of flatlined against Waterford, like no Jason Ford, wasn't Jake Morris as well, like they're key players. So having Jason Ford back in that kind of form, Mark Keogh, anyone who scores a hat-trick, your confidence sky high. Seamus Callanan, as Nickey mentioned, you've a record-breaking goal scorer there. Like, these are just all positives. The only thing is, I'd say, is like they conceded a scoreline that would probably win most All-Ireland finals, you know, if you go back the years as well. So the worry is in such a loose, open, high-scoring game, they still conceded a whack to Offaly. So look, it'd be very different again, but I would have thought pretty much all plus sides from Liam Cowell's point of view.